Welcome, everybody. Get our meeting started. I'll call the order of the Finance and Audit Committee for August 26th. Could we start with a roll call?
Yes. Joe Gallagher.
Here.
Julie Peterson. Here. Jessica Dixon. And Chair Pimentel.
Here. Move on to any agenda modifications. None. Public comment. This is an opportunity for matters not on the agenda for members of our public to offer any commentary. Do we have any members who wish to speak? Great.
No hands raised online.
Any public comment from within the room? All right. Thank you. Comments from committee members. Opportunity to express general comments about. Off in there. Perfect. All right, let's move on to consent. We have one item on consent today. It's our minutes, approval of our minutes from July 29th meeting. They were included on the packet that was sent out on Friday. Are there any changes or edits to the minutes? Otherwise, I'll happily entertain a motion to approve the consent that includes the minutes.
Motion. Second. Thank you. Peterson and Gallagher. I will take a roll on this item. Director Gallagher? Yes. Julie Peterson? Yes. Jessica Dixon? And Chair Pimentel?
Yes. Item number 2 is our financial performance for July 2025. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So first slide is our month-to-date income. It was a very rough month. We had very low volumes in the month of July. So as you can see, we ended up with almost a $3.7 million shortfall, $3.6 million shortfall in the net operating revenue. While we were favorable to operating expense by about $700,000, that still left us shortfall of $2.9 million worth of EBITDA and $2.9 million net loss for the month. Next slide. So, as a result, because the story has been the same every month about lower volumes and kind of the payer mix, the service mix all shifting, we've got a $17.6 million shortfall on revenue against a $6 million favorability on expense, and that's leaving us $11.5 million behind in budget and as a loss of $11 million. I did a little bit of looking. I was just, kind of curious. We've certainly felt the volume shortfall, so I wanted to kind of see how it compared to last year, through July. And at this point in July of last year, we had $8.3 million more net revenue, net patient revenue. We had a $1.6 million more in other revenue. And some of the things that we've seen, we had, interestingly enough, we had $4.2 million more in expense. And, some of that would be higher expenses with more volume. No, I'm saying that wrong. Skip that last sentence. But I'm reading my note, but what I'm remembering is we have actually, our expenses are $4.2 million higher than the prior year. So even though we've got a lot lower volume, and even though we're flexing, to an extent that we can, when you look at what things are costing us this year, it's $4.2 million higher. Where that mostly comes into play is salary, wages, and benefits. There's about $3.7 million in salary, wages, and benefits. There's I'm only going to give you the ones that are over, so they're not going to add up to 4.2 because there's some things that are offsetting that were a little bit lower than last year. But I think these are the kind of critical items that we've been talking about all year long, which has been, price of staffing the hospital, and the price of healthcare benefits. Our professional fees are up about $1.4 million. Our utilities are up about $260,000, year to date. Probably the largest offset in that has been the other operating revenue coming in, lower than last year. And, a portion of that was just our planning for additional swap payments, thinking that swap 9 was gonna be in place, but, I don't believe that that's all of it. So, you know, when you boil this all down to kind of what's going on, it's our net patient revenue per adjusted patient day is about $100 less year over year, but our expenses are $560 more per patient day, patient adjusted day. So, most of that has to do with volume and service mix. So if we can go to the next slide. So similar to what I showed you last month, this is the slide that kind of shows how we estimate the impacts of that whole net revenue variance. So, you know, $17 million worth of net revenue, about 30% of the shortfall is in just pure volume. About 24% or so is in the service mix, plus the other 3% is kind of the case mix shift. And then 30%, when we say collections, I mean, this can have to do with the payer mix, it can have to do with just our ability to collect, and, you know, any aged accounts or things that we have there. So it's still fairly kind of split between the three categories, but I really feel that, between the volume and the service mix, you know, it's really the pieces that are more driven by our ability to save on staffing or supplies or it's the expense. They're more the expense-driven pieces. Now, actually, before I leave this slide, there's another topic that's kind of related here that I want to slip in without a particular slide to show it, but you can go back real quickly to the year-to-date income statement. So in our net revenue numbers, the net operating revenue, you know, that's a consolidation of gross revenue less, you know, contractual allowances, less bad debt provision for bad debt or true bad debt expense to get to our net patient revenue, and then of course we have some other operating revenue. One of the things that we have been doing over the last few years is we've kind of staggered how we reserve accounts as they get older. So, you know, in the first part of their account cycle lifetime, you know, they're valued at what we expect to get from the contracts or the payers. Then as we get to 365 days, a lot of healthcare providers, they just write it off. They reserve 100% at 365. When I came into the organization, that was not happening. We had done some analysis at the time. There was still, you know, considered some collectability. So from day 365 to day 730, so basically 1 year to 2 years, we continued to reserve about 10% of the remaining balance, because that was what historical, you know, records had shown kind of was collectible. We still try to collect, we still send it to our bad debt vendor, but this extra kind of what I'll call tier before we write it off at 7/31, we write it off at 100%. It creates a lot of extra work and kind of noise in our AR valuation, and not really much benefit to us. Doesn't mean we'll stop trying to collect, but we're sensing that we're probably not really collecting at the rate that we're reserving it. So kind of feel like, you know, this is the year to just clean that up, take the hit, because it will be a hit to the income statement, and start reserving it. Once you hit day 365, time we are able to collect against, that older AR, you know, it'll come back and offset, a pickup for us. We're, you know, we gotta work through the actual mechanics of doing that. There's one thing to just value your AR and write it off that way. There's a whole nother thing to, you know, make sure it's in the right places in MedHost and in our accounting systems. And so, a group of people are gonna work through those details. But as of our last kind of check on what that would mean, it would be about a $2 million hit. There's always a little bit of movement from month to month because you have some new things that are going in, some things that have already moved over to the 730 and naturally got the 100% write-off. So I wanted to bring that as part of this whole net revenue conversation because when we do actually post that, it will look even okay. But I feel like it would be the right thing to do from the standpoint of not going into 2026 and our budgeting for 2026 with that kind of still hanging out there, as well as I kind of expect at some point, you know, that our auditors might look at some of this and say, you know, maybe you're being a little too optimistic there.
Where's, you mentioned are we at the, currently where we're retaining 10% up to 700 or 2? Is that, we're proposing to go from that to?
Currently, once an account hits 366 days, whatever it was reserved at before, it's also, we move it to, now you're reserved 90% write-off, 10% of whatever the remaining balance is collectible. What I'm proposing is that when we hit 360 days, we just say 100% write-off. We will continue to send it to the bad debt vendor. We will just, and so right now in the active AR that's between 365 and 730, we have about $2 million. And so that would be the portion that would, any of it that's still left there, which most of it will be. The only things that wouldn't be still left there are the things that hit 731. But we potentially also have some new stuff coming in that just hit 366. So, you know, it's gonna move a little bit, but it's still gonna be in the $2 million range that we would take. So you don't see it on this slide, but when you see, when you look at a detailed income statement and we have the provision for bad debt line, right now our year-to-date bad debt is $4.9 million, and let's say that didn't change at all, I'd add $2 more million to that to be a 6. So that's what I'm proposing that you would essentially see. No further questions on that at the moment. Let's move on to that. So we've, you know, kind of alluded to the fact that the month-to-date stats are pretty low. We were down 61 admissions, so basically 21% of the admissions that we had planned for. We were had a very low length of stay at 3.24, so that was another, you know, 300 fewer patient days than had planned. Deliveries, you know, they're hanging in there, so they're pretty close to budget at 62 deliveries. Inpatient surgeries, the same thing, right near budget. But you see 44 outpatient surgeries, shy of budget. A number of those would have been cath lab, but some of those other we're starting to feel the effects of less ortho, less general surgery. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in the year-to-date numbers. And then our ER visits were down almost 15%, kind of offset by our non-ER outpatient visits up about 15%. So the year-to-date slide. So I took a quick look while I was looking at the year-to-date slide to also compare kind of what this meant when we compared to last year. because we've talked in the past months about different things, initiatives that we budgeted for, such as the cath lab, such as the pediatric admissions, things that have not come to fruition as we had planned. So when you look at admissions, you know, it looks like, gee, we're 13% unfavorable to budget, which we are, but we're actually about 12 more admissions than we were this last year. So, you know, we've just didn't grow, basically, in the way we expected to there. The length of stay and the difference in length of stay is pretty significant, because at this time last year we had a 3.75 length of stay, and with roughly the same number of admissions, we were running an average daily census of almost 33. So you can see here we're shy of 30, so you know, roughly three fewer patients per day, and when we're running a census of 30, that's about 10% less. Case mix were slightly lower than last year. We actually had a decent month of July, so we're slightly off from last year, but not too much. But we are missing our budget because we expected that some of this new activity could, and the work that we do around physician documentation, could drive a little improvement in the case mix. Deliveries were up 36 year-to-date over last year, and inpatient surgeries were up about 5. On the outpatient surgeries, we're down 124, and on the ER visits, we're down 980 ER visits from where we were at this time last year. On the non-ER, that being the one kind of definite bright spot in growth this year, not only are we up 14.5% to our budget, but we're up over 2,200 visits from where we were at this time last year. So, unfortunately, you know, a lot of what I just said was the inpatient side is soft volume, the outpatient side soft on the ER, better on the non-ER. So basically what that translates into is the services where I'm generally probably getting the least reimbursement are the busiest, and those services that render a little more reimbursement are the ones that are falling short. Next slide. Here's the admissions, inpatient admissions. You know, it was not a strong month from a payer mix side. Our Medicare volume was down, our commercial volume was down. We saw the largest increases in Medi-Cal, some in self-pay. I worry less about the self-pay because a lot of times we do convert those after the fact to Medi-Cal, but I do worry when we kind of look to the future about what that could look like. So, you know, here, this basically being down, having Medicare down, that was about 24 fewer Medicare admissions. We were down about 18, and this is, I'm just comparing to last month, but about 18 fewer commercial admissions from last year, and up about 8 Medi-Cal and 5 self-pay. Next slide. Similarly, on the outpatient side, here the Medicare outpatient visits were up. We were up about 91 visits. Commercial, still strong at 25%, but last month we had a really good month at 26%, so we were down about 71 commercial outpatient visits, and about 34 in our managed Medi-Cal, or typically our alliance. Next slide, please. So, want to take a quick minute before I jump into giving you a little bit of budget update to just, if there was any questions on this month's financials.
Break down to the last. Maybe this year to date, but we'll sort of place where it all went. Much drops, like in the last 3 months, due to ice or drops.
July, I think, when I look at May and June, which historically have been kind of like summer starting up, when we start to pick up, they were softer than what we had planned for. But again, when you look at kind of take the extra initiatives off the table that we budgeted for, that we didn't implement, and you just look at year-to-date over May or June 24 year-to-date, we really weren't too far off. In some cases, we were exceeding. So I think we probably really started to see the impact of that in July, because that's where census got extremely low. And usually July, August are pretty busy months, at least on ER visits, outpatient, but, yeah.
The other question I have is, these are comparison budget, in terms of actually comparing revenue to expenses. I looked at that cash, like, thousand, that range. Is that accurate, or?
I'm not sure, I think probably the easiest way, revenue for the month of July, we had, let's put it, we had $10.6 million worth of net operating revenue. We had budgeted to have 14.2, so we were off by 3.6. From an expense standpoint, we had $13 million worth of expense.
I got it.
So that was, it's almost a $2.5 million unfavorable on the expenses. Yeah.
EP went up 800,000. I figure what you, was that
Yeah.
the figure you were looking at?
Yeah.
I was trying to
Okay.
find which numbers to compare.
Yeah.
These are the two. Thank you.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, before we step into this, it's a leading to this comment that, as we're developing the budget, I'm trying to understand what the impact, the total impact is to our revenue assumptions. Is it, across the board, we're the 88 million, whatever we projected last year, are we now looking at a 75 million?
Yeah.
Not sure I'm using the right reference numbers, but, 8 million in total net revenue last year. And two, I know we've been making reductions along the way, holding positions, realigning where we could. I'm nervous that we can't wait until January to plan reductions. Which is an assumption that is in the budget. We're reducing ours. From July, we were expecting this in our budget scenario. Now we've dropped them way down. So that's going to end with less revenue for next year's budget, which means that makes operating impacts.
Right.
I'm concerned about waiting till January. Can you talk through?
We're not waiting until January. I mean, you're going exactly where this slide is going, which is, we presented a slide last month, and I have it in the appendix. Basically what we had said last month, we were going to project as volume. And we went back and we said, those were based on kind of May year-to-date data. Let's look now that we've got June and July volumes and see where we should make changes. And so I'm showing you the high-level version, but we also are doing this at kind of the department-level version, where we said, number one, we know some of these initiatives that we're not doing that, so that's all volume.
Yep.
Don't want to plan for. We had really based the other base, though, on our kind of rolling 12 months of volume, but just the drop-offs that we've seen this year. So we revamped and we lowered a lot of our projections. And there's this particular view says this is what rolling 12 ending May is compared to what we're now budgeting for 26. So like in admissions, you can see we're budgeting 430 fewer admissions. In the appendix, I have another slide that just says what had we told you last month we were gonna budget versus what are we now budgeting? And it's, you know, in that case, it's about 530 fewer admissions. What happens here is, you know, we budget all the volumes because they drive so much of the budget, and we try to, you know, kind of lock them in. But because of what we've seen here, we decided, don't lock them in yet. We can tweak as we go, but we then use these volumes to project how much staffing we need, what kind of revenue we're going to bring in, what kind of supplies we should be budgeting for. Those are the main three that are really volume driven. We look at things like purchase services. There's some volume variability there, but a lot of times those are fixed costs. You know, most of our pro fees are going to be fixed costs and still increasing because it's on some years where different professional fees haven't increased, and we're starting to hear from more and more of those physician groups. We already know that we have a 14% increase in benefits expense from our benefits broker, and that's kind of commonplace in the market in general. The only thing that will bring that down is if there is potentially less staff, as we shrink the volume, and we have positions open up, we likely won't fill as many positions. If they're still on the payroll and they're still benefited, we're still going to pay a benefits expense for them. But if some of them leave and we make choices not to fill those, then we would reduction in benefits expense. But either way, on a per person basis, it's going up 14%. So, you know, I'm going to say that we're kind of locking down a lower number of volume, so that we get, I mean, we've been working the expense side and the revenue side in the background. We just haven't brought it out to show because, you know, we've built a model that says as we reduce the volume, all those numbers are going to reduce. And so now we are trying to study them and share them with the leadership team and, you know, kind of make sure we've got our arms around the true impact of that. As we've been talking all year, the challenging portion of that is going to be, it's so much harder to shed expense to match what we're going to shed in revenue, especially on staffing. And so it's going to come down to that, and then add on what we've been talking about with the budget bill. What is the true EBITDA target going to look like for next year? And both of those numbers pretty much produce a negative. Yeah. So, yeah. But I think to your point, it also, you know, we're already just looking at how do we reduce costs and where can we make cuts or not replace positions or not do something that maybe we were planning to do. And that's just based on, you know, cash flow right now. This is going to drive it further, just as we say, well, if we're only expecting this volume, that would lead to a lower salary number. How do we achieve that, or a lower supply number?
And I'm in a place like just illustrative brainstorming. If the board were to say by October 1st, or by our board meeting with a month away, what would a $1 million a month reduction plan after October 1st? And some of that is stuff you guys are just doing already. We're continuing to see $1 to $2 million this month is bad month. We're not keeping up with the erosion of our revenue. So that's why I was saying I'm concerned about waiting till January when we start with the new budget framework. I suppose what I'm hearing is you're not necessarily waiting for the board to direct you to do this stuff. now.
Yeah.
We just can't keep up to erosion month to month.
We're doing this stuff now. As you know, we're feeling the biggest impacts on the accounts payable side. We're doing everything we can. If I look at, week over week AP, and sometimes that outstanding balance pops up a bit more because I haven't paid the monthly benefits cost, which is, $1.25 million a month. Then I make a payment, so that next week it kind of gets back to, where it's been. So it's not like every week we just add another $1 million to the outstanding balance. But every week sometimes we're slightly inching up there, and it's very hard to get anything going back the other way. And makes for some very challenging AP calls. I think, the things that we can speak to having already done are, there's things in the budget that we didn't do that would have cost us money. But if you want to look at it just from a pure cash flow and losing money, then it's really where we're looking at, as we've lost leaders, consolidating positions, just continuing to flex, looking at, hours of operation, things like that, that just say, what are the items that have some potential there. We're always looking on the revenue cycle side for where can we make sure we've got strong charge capture, strong collection, position documentation improvement, things like that. But there's kind of that continual review of what are all the potential levers that we can pull. And I think my bigger worry going into the 26 budget is I might find $1 million worth of savings, but I know just with benefits alone, I'm adding $2 million worth of cost. I think that all of that really leads back to why we're going back to we come back to the board for the whole strategic partnership conversation.
Yeah.
We've also, in addition to those things that Julie mentioned, and consolidating some of our management positions, also started conversations with our unions about ways that we can make cost savings there and some avoidance of cost increases. So we did have those conversations. We've been sending them requests. They don't have to sort of open up the contract if they choose not to avoid some of, or to delay or push out some of those increases. But that's one more way that we're trying to spread this out. Right? Years it's been on our management team, always been on our staff as they've been flexed off and volumes are down. Lately it's been on our vendors and our doctors. That spread as we're forward and trying to get short-term financing, cash flow challenges, or longer-term strategic partnership conversations. So, gotta do all the short-term right now.
My comments are 100% recognizing all the good work that's going on now. And it relates to my experience in my other day life stuff. Where we've been saying to our board, these are all the things we legally are mandated to do. These are the things we do because it's our guiding principle, and these are everything that we do because the community likes or needs these other services, and we approach it from that perspective. So we be prioritizing. Can't set this bucket, but what how do we allocate reductions here, and then recognizing many of our positions are revenue generators. So you can lay off $1 million of positions here, but you might lose $600,000 revenue there. So it's going through that methodology of how do we get to a net $1 million target of savings a month. That's probably not enough right now, but okay. I'm not directing that we do that. I'm just getting
the right conversation.
the anxiety level is higher every month. we had stronger cash reserves, and that's not our doing. We started the hospital with no cash.
Yeah.
Be able to tap into that, mitigate this. We're able to have success in that space, that can help us. But we need to assure, those third parties that would help us that there's a recovery plan and things that will kind of right size it. So it's just, I'm naming the moments and stuff, I'm not necessarily making a recommendation. I appreciate it. Well, leading back to the updated August section to our budget assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that basically on all the inpatient stuff, we're making, 13 to 16% reductions. Outpatient, we're, still growing outpatient volumes and still kind of, those seem to be progressing. I took another look today and said, I might tweak that one back a little bit before we're done. The outpatient ER, that's probably the tough part because where we suspect things might go with, people's concerns about immigration and ICE is that we're seeing fewer people come, but at some point they may be sick enough that they have to come. It's like put off their health care for so long. But at this point, we're saying we've seen enough kind of months of a little bit lower volume. Let's not over project that. The surgical cases, we're pretty much following what we've just kind of seen going on there. We're going back a little bit to look kind of at the modality level. We know that we've got potentially some new surgeons coming on, but we also know there's a ramp-up period. Don't want to overestimate there. We still need to somewhat kind of figure out cath lab because that's a volume that we were shooting for. So we had kind of gone into this budget cycle saying we're almost going to treat cath lab like a new initiative because we didn't have any historical volume to put into what I call the base. And then we will kind of also just reassess and make sure we feel confident with the deliveries. I don't feel too unconfident with them, but it's been a nice upward trend, and so you do sometimes think, will it taper off, level out a bit? We're getting pretty close to, what we're doing now is we are saying, if these are our volumes, what does expenses look like? What does revenues look like? What does the loss look like? And then we'll kind of continue to tweak it as we're putting more detailed volumes out in front of department leaders. And I think, we rely on them from an operational standpoint to, kind of check us on just dropping volume and saying staffing is going to drop at the same proportion. We know that doesn't always happen, so that's got to help us kind of understand where I can do less volume, but I don't necessarily get to drop this person off the salary, so I'm going to have a higher labor standard than what I've been operating at.
Can you speak to, we've made a big reduction in our revisions for July budget assumptions. Is appropriate. What level of that is being driven by HR1? What level of that is being driven by what we're volume now?
All of this is being driven by trend volume. Yes, all of this. We haven't, we've really, the HR1 stuff has been basically a financial calculation on the dollars piece. We don't necessarily have a good way, insights into, how to really translate that into our visits.
And we start to see reductions from the state, and the big impacts, if I recall, are October.
Yeah, but I think the Alliance is still anticipating 3,000 or 4,000 people in our part of the community losing coverage at some point next year. Yeah. From Medi-Cal.
Yeah.
So it'll be spread throughout the year, not just for next year. All at once.
And that assumption hasn't, we haven't really factored that in to here yet.
No.
Yeah.
We don't know how that 3,000 or 4,000 boxes.
You know,
This is volumes,
Yeah.
right? So we're anticipating the volumes are more following our trends.
Yeah.
When we layer reimbursement on top of this, we're gonna have to factor in HR1 reimbursement sections.
this is basically base or historical, you know, what we're gonna say lines hands. Normally then we come in and we add initiatives on, so if we had a growth initiative, and we're gonna grow in this area and add so much revenue, so much expense. We've also historically, sometimes we have what I call a cost initiative, something like this last year where we had, you know, a new radiologist contract that was going to cost us more, so it was, you know, going to, reduce our potential EBITDA production by that difference. So when we go to layer in HR1, you know, if you think about what we've shared now, we say, well, we don't know enough about QAF 9 yet, but we know that this is somewhere in the $3.5 to $5.5 million reduction just based on looking at the HA numbers on the Medi-Cal impacts, the Medicare sequestration. We would budget, let's just say we decided on $4.5 million to pick out the middle there. We would just basically budget an initiative that was a $4.5 million hit to this organization as an initiative. So if we started out at minus $5 million from our base, say that was what the EBITDA number was showing, and we added 3.5, we'd or 4.5, we'd be budgeting minus 9.5. It's not a pretty picture because doing this, we know that is driving it, you know, drive up the loss and layer on more loss on top. That was my last slide.
From a timing perspective, if you can remind me when it planned to go to our board, was it in October or November?
You know, I always hope by towards the end of October, when we have an October board meeting, to have the budget, the draft budget, starting to look like it's got kind of an idea of the shape. I'm a little less confident with that, with all this moving parts and pieces, but that's still our goal. I can't remember, is it November when we don't have a
Finance is not in November.
There's not a finance meeting in November, but there is a board meeting. Yeah. So, you know, likely, as we have done in most years, taking final in our December board meeting. But, we will be trying to have a pretty good picture of where things are headed by the October.
It's important at the October meeting to at least, where we're talking about the assumptions. And seeing a reaction from our board, make sure they're understanding it, and not that anybody would be suggesting how we might invest in a new area, but sure the board members are the October meeting.
I think that, you know, I'm curious if there's more conversation to be had there. You know, Steve last month gave the budget bill impact, which is most significant. I mean, I think we should be able to start putting the numbers behind, like if these are the volumes, you know, kind of putting it in an income statement view that says, okay, that means million worth of net revenue versus 135 or something like that. So we start to see that shape up. And we should be able, well, it'll still be a moving target. We should be at that point even by the September meeting.
I guess, yes, thank you. So let me reframe that, what my brain was thinking and what the words didn't express. So what would be helpful at the October meeting is give scenarios in a range of if this, then this, and be able to contextualize that by saying, right now, we're probably at a 70% confidence level with the numbers. What it could look like for these different assumption models. It's important for the board and the community to have time to process before that December board meeting. Any other questions, comments about the budget? Getting back to the change in AR, won't like it, but let me reframe that, like it's a rough time to add another $2 million to loss, planned loss, but it's the right thing to do. And I appreciate the recognizing that we should go into next year with our best numbers, knowing what we're going to face. Carrying $2 million of stuff we know that isn't valid doesn't make sense at all. So I'm really glad you're bringing this up. I appreciate the context.
Sure.
And I'm just reacting to the impact it's going to have on our numbers for this year.
We don't know it's not valid. It's just that it feels,
Fair.
because we do use a bad debt vendor.
Yep.
And I know my new rev cycle director has at least made connection with them and is trying to set up some meetings for us to really get a better sense of, how they're operating, what they're able to collect. Our early out self-pay vendor is, we also meet with them monthly. I think it's just, in my mind, anything that is that old is a lot less collectible. And when you think about where everybody's feeling the pinch with inflation and cost of things, it just feels like it's not likely to get better. It's likely that collection flexibility will get a little bit worse. We won't stop trying to collect. We do those on a contingency basis, so we don't really pay for somebody to keep working them until they actually collect something on them. So, and this is the first place I've worked where they've actually had that, what I call that second tier of holding it another year. And I think some of that came from all of the transitions that happened in the couple years preceding, because there was like 152 and a company 154 and then a company 153, and we just want to get kind of more industry standard, cleaner, and just keep doing our best to collect it.
Any other comments? All right. No action required for this item. It's information only. We're ready to adjourn, so I'll adjourn our meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.